Ramadan, rescue, redemption, and resurrection. What do Ramadan, Passover, the crucifixion, and the resurrection have to do with one another? These three religions, three views, and three different results is what we're going to tackle today. Can each one of these views be correct? Join us today as we take this time to stop and think about it.
Hello? Hello? Anybody home? Think, McFly, think.
I'm thinking.
What were you thinking?
I'm trying to think, but nothing happens.
Don't say anything now. Just think about it.
You're listening to Stop and Think About It, a podcast for the Christian thinker. In a day when sound biblical preaching has been replaced by man-centered entertainment, and the church has become increasingly anti-intellectual, this podcast will encourage believers to think biblically and theologically. So please join me as we get ready to stop and think about it.
Greetings, friends and foes, saints and sinners. Thank you for joining us for today's episode of the Stop and Think About It podcast. I'm Phil, the Bronx Expositor, and joining me today is an old friend, well, not very old in years, Andrew Rappaport of Striving for Eternity Ministries, and the host of several podcasts, including Apologetics Live, The Rappaport, and the Theology Throwdown, which you can find on the Christian podcast community. I also have in the background with me Ishmael with no H, Claudio. He's the producer of the Stop and Think About It podcast and the host of Breaking Bread podcast. So greetings, Andrew. What's been going on with you and your ministry?
Doing well. Thank you for the invite. Privileged to be on here with the street preacher himself, the king of street preaching, Phil Sessa.
All right, let's not get crazy.
Hey, I've been street preaching with Phil for a very long time-ish. So we've been out on the streets in New York City going on, I don't know, what would you say, like 15 years?
At least. That's why we bought the step stool, so people can see me, you know?
Wow. So a question for you guys now, since it's been like 15 years. Have you ever came across anybody that was like Muslim or Jew?
All the time.
Oh, yeah.
And how does that experience work out for you guys? Like, how does that?
So I'll give you one where we had a guy who was up on the box, and a whole Muslim family came up to him. So what did he do? Instead of answering the questions, he goes, "Oh, my friend Andrew, he's over there. He'd love to talk to you." And so all of a sudden I see 6-7 adult people. So it was a father who taught at, I think it was University of Cleveland, PhD professor. And he thought he really understood Christianity very well. And it was him and his adult sons, their wives. So we're sitting and talking, and it was really interesting because he's trying to explain what Christianity believes, that we believe in three gods. And I'm explaining what I believe of Islam. And one of the things that was interesting was I explained when I wrote my book, What Do They Believe, which covers the Western religions, that I specifically only use the Quran as my source because when you look at the Hadith, there's differences within the different divisions of Islam. Well, he respected that and said, "You really understand Islam then if you're, as we're going through." He says, "We believe in three gods." And because we had an outreach and had like 20 people out there evangelizing, I'm just going person after person. "Hey, Jim, come here. Define the Trinity?" Just randomly grabbing people. And they're like, one God, three persons. Okay. Person after person. And after like 6-7, he's like, okay, I get it. I said, so at the end, so did I misrepresent Islam in any way? He said, "No, you have a really good understanding of Islam." I said, "Okay, and I'm telling you and proved to you that you're misrepresenting Christianity. So before you say that Christianity is wrong and Islam is right, you should at least investigate it the same way I investigated what you believe to not be inaccurate about it."
Imagine that. Yeah, I've asked Muslims, is it possible that there's anything wrong in the Quran? Can Muhammad have ever been wrong? He said, "Well, no." And I said, "Well, why did Muhammad ask for forgiveness if he was never wrong? And secondly, why does the Quran say that the Trinity is the Father, Son, and Mary?"
Correct.
And there's actually a surah there, which we'll probably hit in a little while.
Yeah, and I mentioned that one a lot because that one is not one where they'll say, well, the Bible has errors, and they'll say, look, here's 10 lepers and here it's only one leper. Well, that's not a contradiction because, there 10 lepers healed, one came back. Not a big deal. But when you have something that's definitional, when you define the Trinity as the Father, Mother, and Son, that's an issue.
Yeah, that's like there were two angels, one spoke. They say, see, one spoke. That doesn't mean that there weren't two there. It just means that one spoke.
Yeah. And so the thing that you end up getting is, and this is a thing that I've started doing with Muslims, a question I ask Muslims a lot, because this question actually tells me whether I'm dealing with an American Muslim or an Arabic Muslim. I'll ask, does a woman's opinion, is it equal in authority to a man's opinion? Now, if they say yes, they're probably more Americanized. If they say no, because that's the right answer in Islam, would be no, because it takes 4 women to speak and give evidence to equal one man. If they say that yes, okay, well, they're Americanized, then I ask, is the Prophet Muhammad's, is a woman's opinion or thoughts more important than the Prophet Muhammad's? And they'll always say no to that. Everyone always says no to that, every Muslim. And I say, okay, so when the Prophet Muhammad said that he saw a demon and it was his wife who said it was Gabriel, who was right? Now they're in a dilemma, because if the wife's opinion doesn't matter as much as the Prophet Muhammad's, and yet the Prophet Muhammad rightly concluded it was a demon, it was his wife that he listened to, a woman. And that puts them kind of, you'll see them kind of struggle with that one sometimes. It's like, wait, what? All of a sudden it's going against everything they've thought. But when I do apologetics, I don't want people to just give the common answers that people are ready for. I like to think of things that make them think.
He listened to his wife. I think there was a problem when that happened the first time, wasn't there? Just saying.
Well, okay, but 1 Peter says to deal with your wife with wisdom there.
There you go. I guess Adam did not do that. he just said, yes, honey, I'll eat the fruit. So we have this week marks major holidays for 2 different religions worldwide, Islam and Christianity, concerning the resurrection and redemption for Christianity, and Ramadan for Islam. And then April, the Jews will celebrate Passover. And since I'm an expositor and love to alliterate, we're calling this podcast Ramadan, Rescue, Redemption, and Resurrection. All right, so Ramadan. Muslims believe that Muhammad received the call to be a prophet during this month, and that it's a special time. And so at this particular time, March 10th to April 10th, they've been fasting apparently from sunup to sundown. And they have to abstain from food, eating, drinking, smoking, and sexual intercourse. Although, as a quick aside, I know a guy. He said, "Yeah, I'm going to abstain from this, and as soon as we're done, I'm going back to everything, including drinking alcohol heavily and all kinds of stuff." So I was like, "Okay, that sounds like very, very much on the line of holiness." But what's interesting is that. Well, those with medical conditions and youth are exempt, but Allah was an Arabian god who didn't seem to see beyond the Arabian Peninsula, because didn't he realize some of the countries have different amounts of sunlight throughout a given day? So the amount of fasting around the globe is different for various Muslims. So if you lived in Murmansk, I think I'm pronouncing that right, Murmansk, Russia, you have 20 hours and 45 hours of fasting, 20.45 hours of fasting, compared to Ushula, Argentina, you only have to fast for 11 hours. All right, Andrew, what do you think about that?
Well, I think what I call that is skipping a meal. Right? I mean, it's not really a fast the way that we see a fast in the Bible. When Jesus fasted for 40 days and 40 nights, right? It was just water. That's a very different than the fast that they say, and they make a big deal of it. But the other thing people may not always know, you know who's exempt from following the fast and all the ordinances of Ramadan? Soldiers.
Who's that?
Soldiers, which makes it kind of interesting right now, because there's debate on whether, the conflict in Israel, whether Israel should do what the Muslims do, is attack on high holy days, and yet the soldiers are exempt from that. But it's really what they're doing is having the daytime hours that they don't do these things. But as you pointed out, many of them, as soon as the sun goes down, they have a big feast every night.
It's like a Thanksgiving meal every night. Actually, what's interesting is more food is consumed during Ramadan than any other time during the year. They order so much food. Cholesterol goes up, obesity goes up, the pounds go up. And then, of course, there's a lot of food that's just absolutely wasted. I had one Muslim lady tell me, tell me her father got heart disease and diabetes during Ramadan from the amount of food he ate. So, I mean, it just seems to me, correct me if I'm wrong, that the fasting that is done, or the style, the reasoning, is everything Jesus said don't do.
Yeah, well, you see that with several religions. You'll see that with Mormonism as well. It's one of the things I point out. You could tell that these are man-made religions, and what I mean by that is not man human beings, but man as versus women. Because everything that's in heaven is everything that satisfies a man, and it's everything that would be wrong on earth. So that you could drink all you want, you could have women all you want, do everything you're not supposed to do here on earth. And so it's like it's a delayed gratification to say, well, we'll get that in the future. But it's clearly a religion that's appealing to the men, especially if you look at the certain sects that would say, okay, when you die, you get all these virgins and women that you can have.
72 black-eyed virgins, but I think it said Virginians maybe, and they misheard that, but tongue in cheek. So they're doing this because supposedly Muhammad received his revelation in the cave.
And I'll just put one note on the last thing he said about Islam. Very interesting is, and you could go to MRM.org, stands for Mormonism Research Ministry, MRM.org, and they have an article that Eric Johnson put out on the similarities between Joseph Smith and Muhammad.
Oof.
Both of them find their revelation in the wilderness in a cave with an angel. There's a lot of similarities there.
But what about Jews in Passover? Like, what are they commemorating when it comes to Passover? You were raised in Judaism, from what I understand. Did you do holidays and Passover and all that?
Well, Passover is one of the most referenced festivals in the entire Bible. It is a major, major holiday. It's not the highest of holidays. What we'd call the high holy days would be Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So it's the New Year and the Day of Atonement. But Passover is mentioned, which I find interesting, more than Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur being the highest of holy days, the day that the high priest would go into the Holy of Holies to offer a sacrifice for sin for all the people. And here what you have is a day that's mentioned more than that. I think one reason for that is because the high holy days, or the high Yom Kippur, how many people are active in that? One, the high priest. And you can't even see what he's doing because it's behind the cloth of the Holy of Holies, and then behind that, or outside of that, is the holy place. So it's very separated. But the Passover is something that all Jewish people would be required at that time to return to Jerusalem for the festival. And so this is a festival that goes back to Egypt. You can read about it in Exodus, when God was going to bring the Israelites out of Egypt, and he gives 10 plagues. The final plague was the death of the firstborn. And for Israel to avoid this plague, they had to do an act of faith. They had to take a lamb, kill it, and basically put the blood on the doorpost of their door. And the angel of death, and this is where we get the name Passover, would pass over the houses that have that. So those that did that, the angel of death would not do those houses, but everything in Egypt suffered a from the death of the firstborn. And so the command from God with Passover was that there would be, basically, this was the last and final time that there was going to be that one of these, there's the plague of the frogs and the blood, all those things. There was darkness was the 9th. And this 10th one, God knew was going to be a final one. So he says to the Israelites to get ready to move quickly. He says, get food together. You don't have time to wait for your bread to rise, but you're going to grab whatever you have and get it ready. And Pharaoh was so upset at the death of his firstborn that he just sent Israel out finally. Get out. And so they rushed out. So what some people don't know is there's actually what we call Passover is two separate holidays. Okay? It's the Passover, which is the first night. And then the second night starts the Feast of Unleavened Bread to look at the 7 days that they left in the wilderness without having bread that was leavened because it didn't have time. So they had to have unleavened bread for those days. So the Passover is really looking at the idea of God's protection over his people and providing for them. And you see that provision really through the 40 years of the wilderness, but that's separate from Passover. But Passover is repeated throughout. And an interesting thing, one of the things I always used to ask my professors in seminary, why did Jesus come on the Passover and not Yom Kippur? And if you think about it, what is Yom Kippur? The Day of Atonement where the high priest pays the atonement for all of the people. That seems more symbolic to what the cross was. Now, I'm not picking a year, so don't get on me, Phil. But my theory is maybe Jesus is going to return on Yom Kippur. Just a theory. Can't prove it. But why Passover? And I think that maybe because you, in your purpose of literation, because it's just the preacher in you, you call it resurrection. And that's what it was. Passover was the Lord passing over, not providing death where it was deserved, to provide life. And that's what Jesus did at the cross.
Wow. Yeah. And I think a lot of people don't understand what it means, and that today they don't have a temple and there's no high priest. And I've been hearing that they're building another temple for, probably like 20 years. But and they're collecting all the pieces. They are. Actually, I had a Orthodox Jewish rabbi that was trying to convert me back to Judaism. How'd that work? It didn't work. He got the gospel instead. But the reason is because, I'm a Kohen. So what that means is my family would be the Korhites that would take care of the temple elements. So they're looking to get more and more of that Levitical family to be active and it's really kind of interesting because there's different sects of Judaism and of Orthodox Judaism. So they all want to have that family so that if they redo the temple, they get to control it. So now redemption and resurrection, Christianity. So what's the deal with the death of Christ and the resurrection? Some don't even believe it ever took place, such as Muslims. They deny the crucifixion altogether. And there actually is a verse in the Quran that says that, and we'll tackle that in a minute. But what do you say about the crucifixion and resurrection? Yeah, and just for any Muslims that may be listening, when he says a verse, it's surah, just to make the translation. Yes, they would call it a surah, just so that people would understand. So the resurrection is attested to, at the time it happened, by over 500 people. So that's not something that you can fake too easily. Just when you look at eyewitness testimony, the evidence that's there, you have Jewish historian Josephus who will refer to it. And it's so interesting. The way you know that Josephus must have be a strong evidence is that all the atheists want to throw out everything he said. Not just bits and pieces. They want to throw everything he said out because they want to discredit him completely, which tells you what he said must have been right because they don't like it. So, but even he, as a historian,
Jewish, so he's not Christian, he's not looking to prove Christianity, working for the Roman government, which at the time was not open to Christianity. So the argument that it was the Roman Catholic Empire, it wasn't at that time. And so he's writing a history of the Jewish people for the Romans. And he states as fact that Jesus rose from the dead. Why? Because of the evidence in his time, as close as he was to it. It was clear evidence that Jesus rose from the dead. This was the thing, Phil, you know my testimony coming out of Judaism, and the resurrection was the thing that convinced me of Christ. I mean, I ended up believing in the New Testament before I believed in Christ because of the evidence of prophecy. But then looking at the evidence of the resurrection, if you cannot explain away the resurrection, that is the key. That's what vindicates that Jesus rose himself from the dead. When the person who told me that Jesus Christ died for my sin and rose from the dead, I stopped him and I said, look, Chuck, dead people don't rise, they rot. Now, granted, I guess for your sake, I was a preacher in future, preacher getting ready to alliterate there. But that's what dead people do. They rot. And so I was trying to come up with a way of explaining the resurrection. And I never read Josh McDowell's Evidence Demands a Verdict or More Than a Carpenter, but I have all of in there, he has these different views, false views of the resurrection. Maybe they got the wrong tomb. Maybe Jesus didn't really die, as what they call swoon theory. Maybe the disciples stole the body. Every one of them I came up with. There's one I think to this day was still original with me. I said, Chuck, my last argument was, Chuck, maybe the disciples dug a hole underneath the tomb and snuck the body out through the center. And he's like, through stone, Andrew, in 3 days? They didn't have heavy equipment back then. And I put my head in my hands, just shaking my head. And he's like, what's wrong? I said, look, if Jesus rose from the dead, that proves he's God. And Chuck is like, well, yeah, that's what I've been trying to tell you for 3 hours now. And I'm like, well, if he's God, I'm accountable to him. And so the resurrection is what Paul would use in 1 Corinthians 15 as an argument that says that all of Christianity rests on that. In fact, he says, if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, then we who believe in the resurrection of all men would be in vain.
Well, yeah, he says, this is of first importance. So this is pretty important. And I like what you said about the resurrection as God's vindication, because the Jews accuse him of blasphemy. The Romans accuse him of insurrection. And so therefore, a blasphemer and an insurrectionist should die. And on every level, when he went to the cross, the world judged him as unholy, unrighteous, and harmful, and defiled. But we know that Hebrews 7:26 says he was holy, harmless, undefiled, separate from sinners, and in him there was no sin. So on the third day when he rose, I mean, that changed everything. God saying, my son is innocent of all charges leveled against him by his resurrection, because if he was a guilty man, he would have stayed dead. But he's not a guilty man. He is risen indeed. And I had not realized this, but the 500 people that he appeared to, none of them were unbelievers. And I know that they made a movie called Risen, I believe, and he appears to all these unbelievers. Well, that never happened. And we know that masses don't hallucinate, so to speak. So 500 people didn't have a hallucination and just kind of got that wrong. And you already hit on the swoon theory, and the new one is digging the tunnel. That sounds a little bit more like the Colombian cartel or something.
Hey, I said it's original with me.
It is original in you. All right, I'm giving you credit for it.
Look, I was desperate to disprove the resurrection, because if I could prove that Jesus didn't rise from the dead, then he's not God. Yeah. So now flip that around. So if I can't disprove the resurrection, that's why so much hinders on that. The resurrection is what validates that Jesus is God.
Now, we have three religions. They believe three things, even three contradictory things. Is it just important to, hey, at least you believe something? Does it matter what you believe? And these are contradictory beliefs, are they not?
Well, they are. So you mentioned Islam. What does Islam believe about what happened with Jesus on the cross? This should be more concerning for a Muslim, just to be honest. If you are a Muslim, think about what the Quran teaches, what Islam teaches about what happened on the cross. That God put a lookalike up there. They acknowledge that someone died on that cross, and it's someone that looked like Jesus. But what does it say about the God of Islam that he would deceive not unbelievers, believers? He deceives his own people to believing that was Jesus up there. Now, some branches of Islam would say that was Judas. Some don't have a name, but they all agree it wasn't Jesus. It was a lookalike that God, Allah, made look like Jesus. So if you believe in a system where your God can deceive you, how could you trust anything that God says? It's just an honest question that I would have for any Muslims that are listening and to think about.
That's the stop and think about, by the way.
Yeah, stop and think about that if you're a Muslim. The other thing is, from a Jewish perspective, you have a view that either Jesus was just a good man who took it too far. There's a book that I have on my shelf called The Passover Plot. Very, very common book read by Jewish people to explain what happened with Jesus on the cross. And many Jewish people would hold to this. And basically the book talks about the idea that Jesus was he was a radical Jewish rabbi who, or not, they wouldn't even say rabbi, but a Jewish person who just took it too far. He never anticipated that they would kill him over it. But at that point, it was too far gone, and he wasn't a prophet. He wasn't anything special. He was just a rebel, or just a radical who wanted to try and overthrow the Roman government. He didn't like what was happening, and that was his way of doing it. It just went too far. And so they would say he was just someone who was lying, basically, to his followers. And so I think it was C.S. Lewis. I don't know where this originated with, but it does fit. You have three views of who Jesus was. He was either a liar. He told people he was God. That's undeniable. And if you deny that, if you're Jehovah's Witness or Jewish or Muslim or that wants to deny that Jesus said he was God, talk to me, because I've looked through the entire Gospels. 50% of the Gospels, well, technically 48% of the Gospels, refer to Jesus as God directly or indirectly. That's not a little bit. That's not something that was added in later. It is essential to the story of Christianity that Jesus is God. The denial of that and trying to say, well, Jesus didn't actually say that. Oh, yes, he did, very clearly. And Muslims want to deny that, but you can't deny that using the Bible. You can only deny it using the Quran, which says you can trust the Bible. And by the way, if you want to deny that one, we have hundreds of copies of the Bible from before Muhammad was born. So if Muhammad said you could trust the Bible of his day, well, there aren't much differences between that one and the one we have. So you could say it changed over time, but Muhammad told you could trust the Bible, so go try doing that. So Jesus either lied saying he was God, or he was just a complete lunatic claiming he was God, just out of his mind. And Judaism would usually hold to one of those two, either that he lied or was just a lunatic, all because the only other option, and the right option, is the Christian view, is that Jesus is Lord, that he's God, who came to earth so he could die for the sins of a sinful people, because that is the punishment. The payment of sin is punishment forever. So either we have to pay it forever, or you need an eternal being to pay it once in time that because of his nature would count forever. That's what makes Jesus unique.
That's on point. Can't argue with that. What about looking at the claim of Muhammad's revelation, salvation, the person of Christ? Did he actually receive a revelation from God?
Well, I will say this, as I say to Muslims when I talk about this. I agree. This sounds strange for people here. I completely agree with Muhammad when he talks about that revelation. Because remember, when he got that revelation, he claimed it was a demon that was giving him that revelation. I agree with Muhammad, not his wife.
So in other words, it was an angel. It was just a fallen one.
Correct.
I believe there's a verse in our Bible that Satan comes as an angel of light. But this one, my understanding is it was a common practice for the spiritually minded to retreat and meditate in a cave in utter solitude. And Muhammad practiced this for several years in a cave in Mount Hira, if I'm saying that properly. And he pondered the coming judgment, became convinced that there was one true God amidst the idolatry of the polytheistic people he was around. And according to the tradition, while meditating, this angel commanded him to recite. But when it did, it grabbed him by the throat and it choked him. It seized him, and he was to recite until he was to yield to that. And this, is that what the angels in the Bible did? Is that how they brought their messages? They grabbed and choked people and said, recite?
No, I don't think that's exactly how I see it in the Bible. And I mean, if people want to, by the way, get a good, really short history, in my book, What Do They Believe? It's the only quotation I have from a source that is not directly from the religion. There's a quick history I've taken some classes on Islamic history. And so it was really good. It was just super concise, which is why I asked if I can include it. But he goes up on this, in this cave, and he's just pondering things. Now, keep some things in mind. For folks who are not familiar with Islam, Muhammad was an illiterate slave. He was someone he was purchased by a woman who was very wealthy, and he was her slave, and then eventually married her. Mm-hmm. And so in this marriage, it allowed him suddenly to have lots of time to ponder, and he followed a minor god. And this is not, even many Muslims don't know this, but in the 2 classes I took of Islamic history, they both mentioned this, is that there were many gods in that area. And Allah was a minor moon god. So for the many Muslims that believe that Allah was the God and everyone always believed in just the one God of Allah, that is not actually so. Muhammad made really Allah be the one that everyone would worship in Islam, because he claimed that his deity that he followed out of all the others was the one, where all the others said all of them are God. And he chose one and said this one is. And so that was a thing that we end up seeing, is he believed that he got this revelation. He believed he got it. And I say it again because it's an important point. He got it and said it was a demon, and his wife, a woman, told him, no, it was Gabriel, the angel. And so I think that Muhammad had some experience. I'm not going to deny that. I do believe something happened, but I believe it was demonic.
Yeah, and what's interesting is his wife was an Ebonite that did not believe Jesus was God in the flesh. And so he was kind of getting like second, third-hand Christianity. He wasn't actually getting biblical Christianity, and his wife did not have biblical Christianity as well. And so, I mean, I think you just see the influence of her influence clearly upon him. You know, maybe it was, happy wife, happy life. It seemed to be.
Yeah, I mean, look, and let me just say for any Muslims that are listening that just got offended with what I just last said, just remember, I'm agreeing with Muhammad. So if you get upset with me over saying that I believe his vision was demonic, I'm agreeing with him. Right? So don't get upset with me, get upset with Muhammad then. But you're absolutely right, is you can see what you just said about Muhammad's relationship with his wife in history. A lot of Christians don't know this, but if Muhammad would have died before his pilgrimage, we would uphold him as an honorable man of his time. Because prior to that, he had one wife in a culture that was where men had multiple wives. He was devoted to one wife until she died. the wife that bought him as a slave, married him. He was dedicated to her. And as you end up seeing, she really was the dominant force in that relationship.
Yes.
But he had the privilege of going and he went around and was looking to bring peace. And that's why some people would say Islam is a religion of peace. In the early years, it absolutely was. In fact, Muslims in the early years were the people that all of the traders wanted to hire because they had a view of the afterlife. And so they would die to protect your goods because that was honorable. And so they were the protectors for so many merchants in a time when traveling as a merchant was dangerous because there were thieves that would just take all your goods. And so you had to hire people as protection, but the people you hire as protection could be a problem because who protects you from them? And there was a definite shift that occurred after the pilgrimage because they went from being the protectors to the pirates themselves. Because all of a sudden, Muhammad had to feed lots and lots of people. And so there was definitely a shift, and that's when he starts marrying multiple women. When he was married to 4 women, he said, that's it. You're only married to 4 women, no more, until he wanted a 5th wife. His adopted son, he saw his adopted son's wife and fancied her. And his 4th wife, it's very interesting the way that Muslims tell this story and the way that I think it really happened, because what happened is she turns and says, oh, Muhammad, you're so loved by Allah that he gives you everything that you want. And the way they interpret that is and tell that story is that Muhammad is so special that God gives Muhammad everything he wants. But I tend to think if you read through the life, the Quran, and you read through with his wife's, I just don't see it that way. She was a feisty one. And I think she was like, saying it this way. Oh yeah, Muhammad, you're God's favor. He just gives you everything you want, huh? You want another wife. Yeah, I think there was some sarcasm in there.
Yeah. Well, I know that's one of your spiritual gifts, but I appreciate it.
I got a black belt in sarcasm. I can drop you in a word.
There you go. Well, and it's interesting, just as an aside, what you mentioned before concerning the parallels of Mormonism and Islam. One man, there was a claim that they spoke to an angel. They wrote a book, and they had polygamy in their lives. They both had, tons of women. And really interesting, because if you're limited to 4 wives, how did Muhammad end up with 11? But you kind of answered that and saying, you can get everything you want because, the main guy can have more than he can handle, so to speak. And I know this may be an offensive point to some Muslims, but one of them was only 9 years old, the child bride Aisha. And there are 2 different versions of the hadiths. One said she was prepubescent, and then all of a sudden she menstruated, and then he took her into the bedroom. And the other hadiths don't mention that at all. So it's which one is it? And so
she was actually 6 years old when they married, but didn't come together and consummate until 9, and she was bride number 4, the feistiest of them. And so there's a lot of things that Christians don't really understand with Islam. Like, one of the things, here's an interesting fact: the Quran was not written during Muhammad's time. It was memorized word for word and written down about 18 years after the death of Muhammad, because their soldiers started dying, and their 3rd caliph said, we better get this together and write it down before all the soldiers die. Now, here's a little thing with Islam. They believe that God wrote through man. So he wrote through Moses, and then men corrupted it, wrote through David, and then men corrupted it, wrote through Jesus, and then men corrupted it. Now we know Jesus didn't write, and there's plenty of other writings other than those, but sure. They'll say all those 3 times it was corrupted, but Muhammad wrote and it was never corrupted. Well, first off, Muhammad never wrote because Muhammad was illiterate, but what he said was written down. Very interesting, because the 3rd caliph, Uthman, he's the one that asked for it to be written. They write it down, he collects it all, and here's the dilemma they have. He ends up saying we have to burn the abhorrent texts. which then right there tells you they didn't have the same version. So where they say we have different versions, and when they say we have different versions, they're talking about New King James, New American Standard. Those are translations. We need to go to the Hebrew and Greek to see if there's different versions. And we find that there's very little differences where there's meaning, where we can't get back to the original if there's a spelling mistake or things like that in a copy. But in the Quran, we can't really do that. You know why? They burned all the other versions. How do you know that Uthman burned the right one? That becomes a dilemma. I mean, especially if you believe the Quran that God couldn't keep his word the first several times, what makes you think he could keep it the last time, especially when all the other times they said it couldn't be corrupted? And then it's inconsistent. And you have the dilemma that the Quran itself says you could trust the book. And we have copies of the Bible from before, hundreds of years before that statement was said by Muhammad.
Yeah, I asked, I was open air preaching one time, to no surprise, standing on my little stool, and a Muslim came over and said, the Bible's been corrupted. And I said, sir, who corrupted the Bible? He said, I don't know. I said, when did this take place? He said, I can't tell you. I said, okay, well, what verses were changed? So tell me a verse that was one way and now it's this way, and you could show me the corruption. Do you have any evidence for that? He said, no, I don't. And I said, well, the Bible does speak about corruption, but it says you and I are corrupt. And then I just share the gospel with him. At which time, a Jewish man came over and said, you have no right to tell this guy what he should believe and what he shouldn't believe. I said, isn't that exactly what you're doing right now?
Exactly.
Aren't you telling me what I can and cannot do? And so he began to curse and swear and did it. I said, but you weren't a part of the conversation. So, and the Muslim man was very nice. We had a great dialogue back and forth. And I said, you really need to think about such things.
Well, they should stop and think about it.
They should stop and think about it. Absolutely.
Figure out, you got me on that, so I should get you back. Most Christians don't even understand this area, what we call textual criticism. And that's why in my book, What Do We Believe? I included a chapter that at a lay level, people can understand what we're talking about. Are there copyist mistakes? Yes. We can admit that. Muslims won't admit that. And yet today in Arabic, there are multiple copies that have different versions of the Quran based on where they are. Because as the Quran had the same problems that the Greek New Testament had. As people would hand copy it, they would do typos. They would make mistakes. And that is the issue. That happens. And so here's what you have happen. You have that people in Islam just go, no, we have one Quran in Arabic, and they ignore all the variances in those. We can honestly say, yeah, we could look at that. And here's the thing. Here's the best argument that scholars could make that we can't trust the Bible is that the only concern is in basically words where we can't get back to the original meaning or get back to the original, what it originally was. So if you have a typo, you can figure out how to correct the spelling error, right? But if you have something where the meaning is changed and you can't get back to the original, that's a concern because now you don't know what the original meaning was. The best argument that scholars have is Jesus was said to be a carpenter, and others say he's the son of a carpenter. That affects absolutely no doctrine whatsoever. In fact, when we look at it, the category that I just mentioned, where it's what we'd call meaningful and viable, is 1/5 of 1% of all the words in the New Testament. And so when you look at, of all the variances within the New Testament. So you look at the New Testament, about 138,000 words. There's about 33, and I've gone through the entire New Testament looking at every Greek word that has variant readings. And so when you look at 1%, using a really conservative number, you're talking about 33 words out of 138,000 words. I will put that number up to CNN any day of the week.
And it's a wrap. No pun intended.
Well, that's how I end my Rappaport show.
There you go. Wow. Yeah. And those things will never be acknowledged. And who knows? I mean, I think the Quran was written on bark and other things, and who knows if some animal ate that, and so there's a Quran inside of an animal that died at some point.
Well, it could be New Testament as well. maybe Jeremiah wasn't the only one who ate the word of God.
You know, I love this verse in Galatians 1:8 in light of what was claimed to have happened to Muhammad in the cave. Even if an angel from heaven comes and brings another gospel, let it be anathema. And so the warning was already there that this kind of thing could possibly take place or would take place. And I think it bears itself out in Islam. What does Islam believe about the person of Christ and salvation?
Well, let me take a step back there, and I'll answer it for all religions, if that's okay. Because there is, you know, I never expected my book, What Do They Believe, to be used as an evangelistic tool. So I ended up adding in the second edition, I added an epilogue, the uniqueness of Christianity, because I make the case there's only two religions in the world, divine and man-made. That's it. But is there an objective way we can look at a divine versus man-made religion? And so Islam, like every other man-made religion, is going to look at Jesus as just a human being, not as God.
Yes.
That is essential to Christianity. It's one of the things that makes Christianity unique amongst every world religion. It's not based on a system of morality. It's based on a person. Every single man-made religion is about a system of morality. And I'm going to get to why that is. But Christianity is about a person. Is there anything special about Muhammad or Joseph Smith or Buddha? No, they were just a person that God supposedly used. But there is something different about Jesus Christ. He is truly God and truly man. Being truly man, being truly human, he could be a proper substitute for you and I, Phil, for our sin, so that his punishment, his payment of sin would count for us. Being truly God, he can pay an eternal fine once in time, because his nature is eternal. When he died on that cross, as God, it counts for eternity, and it counts for more than one person. Where you and I would, if we were perfect, can only pay it for one person because it would take forever to pay it. But he, being eternal, could pay it for multiple people and account for eternity because of his nature. That's what makes Jesus unique, that he's truly God and truly man. So Christianity is set apart from every other religion because it worships a person that is specific. It's a special person, right? What that leads to is the fact that we as Christians, we come to Christ based on what he did, not what we do. It's the only religion in the world where God does all the work and we do none. Islam would believe that you do one good deed to count for 10 bad. Modern Judaism, which is not biblical Judaism, it's what we call rabbinic Judaism, some call it Second Temple Judaism. They would say you get right with God by doing Torah, obeying the law. That's works. Roman Catholic, you have faith plus works. Every single man-made religion adds human effort because men love to praise what they do. They want to add something to it. So Christianity is the only religion that says God did it. It's done. All your sin, according to Colossians, was paid at the cross. All transgressions paid already at the cross. But man-made religions, because they're a system of do, not done, that's why they're a system of morality. Do this, do this, do this, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. Because it's all about what you do. Christianity is about done. Now, here's the kicker, though. Christianity is the only religion that can have a God that is both just and merciful. Yes. And people are going to go, wait a minute, Andrew. Every Muslim says Allah most merciful. I agree, they say that, but is he just? Because when you look in Islam, there's no way of knowing who he's going to show mercy to. He just lets people in, so he lets criminals go. Why? Because he felt like it. But that's not just. See, justice and mercy are mutually exclusive. You can't have both. If the law said that if I slap Phil here in the face, that he must slap me back at equal force, Phil has one of two choices. He could slap me with equal force. That would be called justice. And he'd want to do that, but that's not Phil's personality. He's a merciful guy, so he wouldn't slap me at all because that's mercy. But if he slaps me with half the power, what's that? Well, it's not justice because you didn't fulfill the law, and it's not mercy because you did hit, right? So half measures don't count with it. You see, Jesus paid the full 100% weight of sin. He took the full punishment upon himself. That is justice. The full punishment was paid. But because he paid it as an eternal being, he can now offer to us mercy. We could be let go and set free, not because of what we've done, but because of what he has done. It is the only religion where God is both just and merciful, and you can see that together. It's the only one. So these three things make Christianity unique from every world religion. And this is the thing where you can objectively look at every religion and say, does it teach human effort? Because if it teaches human effort, one thing we know about human beings, we will praise ourselves. We add to things, what we do. And that's how you can objectively study. I mean, every king that lost a war talks about the battles he won. He doesn't talk about the losses. He's going to write about the battle. I won this courageously. Yeah, but you lost the war.
Right. That's why the Egyptians don't really include the Exodus and all that happened in their writings, because it looks bad. It looks bad upon them.
Just look at a modern thing. Look at politics. I mean, the economy is completely like in the toilet, and Biden's going, but look, and if you look at the number of people the government raised, unemployment's up. Well, yeah, because you hired those people to raise that number up, right? So people will do that. So objectively, you could look at every religion and just say, is human effort added in any way whatsoever? And Hinduism, Buddhism is going to say, no, we don't do that. Yeah, you do. You do, because you say that the things you do in this life are going to count for the next life. If you're bad in this life, you come back worse in the next. If you do good in this life, you come back better until you finally get to nirvana. So every man-made religion is based on human effort. So just look for that. And Christianity is the only one that says God did it all at the cross. And so what we have to do is turn from trusting self and our good works, our good nature, or in my case, I believed my Judaism would save me, just as God's chosen people. Turn from all that and turn and trust Jesus Christ.
So my good works, my good looks, none of that could save me. Definitely not.
Yeah, well, you got better looks than me, brother.
I had a Muslim guy tell me, you're so self-righteous because you believe that Jesus could just wipe away all your sins. I said, actually, I'm not self-righteous. I admit that I'm a sinner. I admit I deserve hell. I admit that God should pour his full wrath out upon me, and that that should be the same true for all people on the earth, but that Christ was perfect, and I put my faith in someone who was sinless, who could take away my sin. I can't do anything to earn it. So actually, you're self-righteous because you believe that somehow your meritorious works will help you get into heaven. Another guy said to me that some Muslims will go to hell and have to pay for their sin and then eventually go to heaven, which kind of sounds like a purgatory type of system, with Roman Catholicism, with their treasury of merit, and that eventually, people like Mary and Paul, their merit can be poured upon the person in purgatory, and eventually they'll go to heaven. But in Christ, you don't spend 1 second in hell, not a second. To be absent from the body is be present with the Lord. And so if he said on the cross, it is finished, in the Greek tetelestai, did I pronounce that right? Tetelestai? Which means paid in full. If it's paid in full, then what else needs to be paid for? If it's full, that kind of does the job.
It is what Jesus said on the cross to Tetelestai. It is finished.
Yes.
There's nothing left.
There's nothing left to pay. So, I feel sorry and burdened, and gripped in my own heart, grieved for those of all the world religions who are trying to work and work and work and work, and yet they're never going to know, right? So if you're listening to this right now, if you died tonight, do you know that you have enough works to make it to heaven? And on that same note, how do you know that God accepts even one one iota of your works when committing one sin, and you were born in sin. I know that Islam rejects that piece that we were born in sin, but then why do we flesh out that nature of our sin if we weren't born in sin? How do you know that anything you've done can undo even one sin in your life?
Well, the thing is this actually also goes to another doctrine that Christians struggle with. Can you lose your salvation?
Yes.
Because if everything was paid at the cross, everything, then there's nothing you could do now that, Jesus didn't know about that.
Yeah. It says he paid it in full, except, I'm actually preaching through 1 John right now on assurance of salvation, and you could check those out in sermon audio, and begin to listen to that series. But I'm just learning a slew of how secure we are in Christ, all over again. And at the end of the book of Jude, he'll present you faultless before him. How can he take somebody like you and I that sins at times and present us faultless? If it's up to us, I mean, we would all get fried, and rightfully so. But if he looks through Christ and sees us as pure and holy and clean, and loves us just as much as he loves his son, and sees us as pure as he sees his own son, because he's looking through the lens of his son at us, then that doesn't mean we have license to sin in any way. And because we love him, we don't want to sin against him. We don't want to violate his word. But yet we want him to find pleasure in us by obeying what he says. We don't have to sweat and be anxious. Am I going to make it to heaven? Am I going to be in heaven? Can I lose my salvation? We don't have to have that anxieties. And there's such a joy and a peace that I can live in the pleasure of God, because he's doing the work. Like you said before, it's a done religion, not I do. Now, we do grow in sanctification, of course, but I'm not earning my salvation by what I do.
Amen.
Well, praise God. Andrew, thank you for joining us today in the Stop and Think About It podcast. Give us your website and the names of all your 15 podcasts.
I'll try and make it easier. Just go to strivingforeternity.org, strivingforeternity.org. Everything is there. You can get to the podcast there. You can just go to christianpodcastcommunity.org, christianpodcastcommunity.org. From there, you can find everything. You can find this podcast that you're listening to. You could find 50 other podcasts on there. My podcast is Andrew Rappaport's Rappaport, Apologetics Live. Those are the two ones that I do on a weekly basis. You could get my books at the website, strivingforeternity.org. What do they believe and what do we believe? They're both there, and actually just released an audio version of those books. So those are out as well through Kindle or whatever Amazon's thing is, Audible. So, but yeah, if you folks want to if anyone wants to have me come out to their church and speak to a weekend seminar, we're different in our ministry. We do not care about the size of the congregation. We actually target smaller churches to help them out, to come in and do weekend seminars and spur them on. So if you have a smaller church, that's fine with us. We actually look forward to that, get to be more intimate that way. So just reach out to us at our website, strivingforeternity.org. We have 2 different speakers right now, myself and Aaron Brewster. So we can do lots of different topics. So if you're interested, please let us know. We'd be happy to come out and help your church.
Amen. Amen. Just a quick plug. July 27th, we're doing a conference called the Contending Conference, looking at truth in a relative world, truth in an idolatrous world, and truth in a sexually perverse world. July 27th at Grace Baptist Church. You could check out soulfishingministries.org. You can contact me, sfm1689@gmail.com, to find more details for that. Or you can check out gbcny.org as well and sign up for that. It will be $10, which will just cover your lunch. And then we will most likely go out and evangelize at the end of the conference, which I learned that approach from Andrew Rappaport as he did conferences ending with evangelistic outreaches. So praise the Lord for that. Well, friends and foes, saints and sinners, thank you for taking this time to stop and think about it.
If you would like to contact us, please email us at stopandthinkcrew@gmail.com. You could also visit our website at www.stopandthinkpodcast.com. This podcast is listener supported by generous people like you. You can give a tax-deductible donation at our affiliate ministry at www.soulfishingministries.org and click on our donate link to give securely through PayPal. Thank you for listening to Stop and Think About It.